What's the most legendary work meltdown you've seen? Story 1. I worked in IT and one guy, who was one of the most chilled guys I knew, was responsible for the deployment, updates, and maintenance of a specific product that generated high revenue. One afternoon I was sitting at my desk and just heard a big crash and saw one of his 3 monitors on the floor. He stood up, shoved the next monitor over the divider onto the next section's desk, then swiped the 3rd monitor off the other side, picked up his keyboard and smashed it as hard as he could, kicked his chair away and slowly and calmly walked out the department without saying a word. He came back to work the next day as if nothing happened. Everyone knew the pressure he was under and was very good at his job, so nobody said a thing. Story 2. Best I've seen was my 7th grade math teacher. There was a girl who always talked in class. She got moved to the front at some point and she was laughing and giggling as always. After being told to be quiet about 8 times, the teacher is standing front and center in front of her, back to her and writing an example on the board. The girl has one of those plastic pencil boxes all the girls used to decorate sitting on the front corner of her desk. The teacher just cracked. In one smooth motion he spins around, yells "shut up" and smacks the box as hard as he can and it goes flying 15 feet across the room, smashes into the wall. Pencils. Freaking. Everywhere. He swiftly walks to the door, slams it shut, and we could hear pounding on the wall. One brave kid peeks out the window. Dude was banging his head against the wall. About 2 minutes later, he walks back in. Crickets. Not a noise in the classroom. He begins walking around, picking up every single pen and pencil, puts them all in the box, places it gently on her desk, and then just continues the example like the nothing ever happened. It was exquisite. Story 3. In high school, I worked at a grocery store, and this kid was all pissed off at another bagger and swearing in front of the customers. He said he was hoping he'd get fired. I told him he should quit before he gets fired, so that it would look better on his resume in the future. A few minutes later, I realized he was missing. Then suddenly, he comes around the corner from the manager's office, no longer in uniform. He threw his uniform in the trash in front of the manager. Then he looked at me and said loudly, "I took your advice," then proceeded to walk across the front end, point to each associate saying, "Fuck you," to each of them and walked out. Everyone was staring at me after, and I said, "I did not tell him to do that." Story 4. I used to work in a kitchen in an old folks' home. I had a manager named Edward who was a know-it-all piece of uninformed shit. I had a coworker named E who had a very serious medical condition and required a certain medication at certain points of the day. Edward didn't like E or the fact that she needed to keep her medication on her person. One day E forgot her medication and begged to run home and retrieve it. Edward smugly denied her and told her to finish work. So she tried and ended up briefly collapsing. She was okay but very weak and disoriented. Edward grabbed her by her arm, escorted her to her car, handed her the keys, and told her to leave. Then he left, to go tell anyone that would listen that he was on drugs and he smelled booze on her. He was in the parking lot and called her mom to take her to the hospital. He was only 20 and very scared. He was discharged that night after some fluids and came back the next day upon hearing what Edward told everyone about her. She stormed into HR screaming for them to bring Edward's ass in the office immediately. As soon as he was called in, she whipped her name tag at him. I obviously lingered close by like a nosy bitch. She was screaming at the top of her lungs that Edward denied her to go home to get her medication. That was on file and HR was very aware of. And how fucking dare he accuse her of being a drug addict? And if he really believed she was under the influence of something, how stupid was he to put her in a car on the company's property, leaving them liable for her damages? At this point, much noise can be heard as all 3 of them are screaming full force at one another. She threatened legal action and stormed out. Well, she did take legal action. For a ton of shit, including putting a clearly ill person behind the wheel. Not too long after this, I also quit. And a few months later, Edward was no longer employed by the kitchen, but rather was working as a deli boy in the local grocery store. I don't know what happened with ES lawsuit, but I hope that place and Edward got everything they deserved. Also, honorable mention to the maintenance man that threatened to shoot my old boss in the face for being such a dickless weasel. Story 5. I have one that'll get buried, but I'm telling it anyway for those that sort by new. I worked at Target while in college for about 3.5 years. It was wild. I saw coworkers get arrested, get in fights, get caught having sex, and yes, melting down. There's two in particular I consider worthy of the thread, though I worry whether or not one counts as a meltdown. The first was an Egyptian man we put in electronics and toys. Dude was massively overqualified with a master's in computer science in Egypt. Great guy. Really had product knowledge, but just wasn't trained well and couldn't understand the stupidity of pushing red cards that customers didn't want or need. Well, one day some redneck gentleman tried switching price tags on some items so he could get something expensive for cheap. Our guy caught it and told him no, and this redneck guy just fucking loses it, starts screaming Islamophobic insults to which our guy doesn't react. Redneck guy decides to escalate and comes around the counter to push him, and that's when our guy, who came from Egypt during a lot of civil strife, just lays this guy out in one or two punches. Management starts berating him after, despite it being self-defense, so he screams back at management about the stupid policies they have, like being punished for defending himself, takes the electronics keys and places them out of the shorter manager's reach, guy was tall, and walks out. He's managing a car dealership now, so it was probably a good career move all things considered. Second, had a fellow cart attendant. Guy wasn't the best worker, but he did his job well enough. One manager really didn't like the guy though. Constantly made comments wondering how co-worker afforded the things he had, old BMW, nice shoes, watch, etc., and frequently implied that coworker was a drug dealer. Coworker was black and manager was white, so I'm sure the coworker probably felt like that implication was a little racist. But he grinned and kept doing his job. Took it to HR once, but was told it was just joking. Manager also got mad at him for stuff he let me and the third cart attendant get away with, constantly like listening to music, slightly overloading the cart pusher, etc. One day I guess he just snapped. The manager screamed at him over headphones while pushing carts, and the coworker just nodded. Went outside and took every cart we had and just scattered them everywhere. Came inside, returned the keys, checked the last couple guests out, clocked out like he normally would, knocked down every item he passed on his way out, and never came back. Story 6. First job working as a host at a local restaurant. Our short, stocky chef was being particularly pestered by our 15-year-old dishwasher boy. Now this dishwasher boy was annoying on any given day. Non-stop talking, tons of gossiping, whining, and bragging pretty much from the start to end of his shifts. I'm standing at the host station at the tail end of the evening rush when out of nowhere I hear our chef yell, through the walls of the kitchen mind you, that's IT you little fuck, followed by the high-pitched wail of the dishwasher boy. I only have time to jerk my head towards the racket when the dishwasher boy comes sprinting out of the kitchen, still screaming, past me, past customers, and out the door of the restaurant. Seriously, him shrieking as he ran by was the only time I've had the chance to experience the Doppler effect without a vehicle passing by. Seconds later, the chef bursts out of the kitchen and follows him out of the restaurant, hot on his heels. What incited the altercation was that the dishwasher boy was being his usual aggravating self, and chef, having enough of his shit, told him to knock it off. Dishwasher boy then decided the appropriate thing to do would be to overhand throw a spoiled spoon at chef while he was working at his station. Spoon caught him square in the face, and that was that. So now every customer in the restaurant and I are staring in awe into the parking lot as chef closes the distance on dishwasher boy. Dishwasher boy appears to turn and say something to chef in frantic defense for himself. Whatever he is trying to say is cut short as chef grabs his torso with both hands, literally hoists him up above his head, takes 2 large steps towards the open steel dumpster, and hurls the dishwasher boy right into it. Chef walks back in and gets back to work without saying a word. Dishwasher boy climbs out and comes back in, crying, and gets back to work. Story 7. I work at a country club that also houses the HOA for several gated communities. My office is right beside the main HOA desk, where my coworker, let's call her Jen, handles all complaints and issues residents might come across. Whenever Jen is out of the office, she turns around a sign to tell residents that if they need a barcode for the gate, they can turn the corner and ask for my help. So, in comes a very angry resident who had just received a $100 speeding ticket by our neighborhood security guards. I could hear her pounding footsteps coming back my way as Jen had stepped away for a meeting. Now, keep in mind I do not work for the HOA. I just work right beside them and can only help residents get a barcode if they get a new vehicle. Well, that's not going to stop this lady from speaking her mind to me about how she does not deserve her ticket. Our security officer is very well equipped. Not only does he use a radar gun to clock cars flying down the neighborhood streets, but he also wears a body cam to record each interaction with residents. So, this lady busts into my office and immediately starts telling me that her ticket is ridiculous and how she's not paying it and yada yada. I try to calmly explain to her that this is not my job, and if she wants to dispute her ticket, she will have to take it up with the head of security. I told her that each officer records every interaction with residents, and they could rewatch the footage from her incident whenever the HOA meeting got out. Now, this is the kicker. The lady told me that she knew she was speeding, and she didn't deny that the video would show her going 20 miles per hour over the speed limit. So, I was like, okay, so what's the problem? She then proceeded to tell me that she should be immune from receiving tickets because she allows the security officer to park in her driveway so he can clock speeders and catch people running stop signs. No joke, this lady admitted to speeding and was trying to hold the fact that she let security park in her driveway over our heads like she's making some huge sacrifice to let them park there, and it's only fair that we let it slide when she gets a ticket. I'm trying to stifle a smirk at this point because I realize how painfully entitled this woman felt she was, which didn't sit well with the woman. She began to get irate, yelling again about how her ticket is unfair, and she will not be allowing security to park in her driveway anymore. She complained about how our security guards are terrible and blah blah blah. So, I just sat still, with a dead, expressionless face until her rant ended, then handed her the business card of our head of security officer and repeated the same thing I had already said 3 times. Story 8. I used to work for one of England's most well-known carpet companies at their head office and main warehouse in southeast London. The problem was that it was abundantly clear there was a big divide between warehouse staff and office staff. Office employees tended to get paid at least 3 to 4K more per month than the warehouse workers. The offices were decked out with fancy dining areas, smoking balconies, a pool table and chill-out room, and, let's not forget, a massive, expensive tropical fish tank display next to a seating area. Warehouse staff, on the other hand, had to go out the back or side fire exits to smoke. We were timed on how long we could take, and if we took too long, we had to make up the time over lunch or by staying late. Despite doing heavy-duty manual labor and specializing in operating forklift trucks and carpet cutting tables as big as a medium-sized swimming pool, we always felt undervalued. Anyway, one particular staff member, let's call him Dave, loved to moan and whinge about it weekly. Anytime we were in the canteen and a group of white-shirt, stiff-collared, snobby office guys walked past, he would always make some snarky comment. Privileged little CNTS. He'd mumble under his breath. The office staff would rub it in by laughing as they got into the lift to play pool upstairs, or occasionally yelling something from the smoking balconies if one of us was huddled around the bench on the floor-level smoking area. About halfway through my shift, in the middle of the week, 3 forklift drivers came racing down the aisles toward the cutting department, beeping their horns and waving to anyone who would notice. One of them pulled up beside my area and said, "The boss just tried to fire Dave." Me, "What do you mean tried to fire Dave?" It turned out that Dave had been pulled into a meeting with the warehouse manager and an office manager, recently promoted from second-floor office staff to head of a department on the 4th floor. This office manager had had enough of Dave's constant digs at the office team and his blatant lack of respect and wanted to make an example of him. To ensure Dave got fired, the office manager apparently made up a load of stuff about him. Well, Dave didn't take too kindly to that. He lunged across the office table and knocked out the office manager with one clean punch. According to the warehouse manager, who told me weeks later, it was such a perfectly executed punch that he wished he had filmed it in slow motion. But that's not all Dave did. We had a mini in-house radio station for the warehouse staff since the building was so large. It played all sorts of music during the day, occasionally interrupted by one of the office girls who would announce weekly, monthly, annual profits, staff birthdays, and similar updates. After knocking out the office manager, Dave broke into the glorified broom closet that housed the sound system and microphone. He kicked out the girl in charge, locked himself in, and spent the next 45 minutes verbally abusing every office worker who had ever pissed him off, all while playing songs over the warehouse speakers. That was Michael Jackson with his hit song, Beat It seemed like an appropriate choice, remembering when I saw Jeremy from accounts beating his cock on the smoking area balcony one late shift when he thought he was alone. What a shit stain of a man. Anyway, next up is Cindy Lauper with Girls Just Wanna Have Fun. This one's dedicated to Janet in sales on floor 1. For the countless men she's fucked in that office while spreading her diseases across the whole team. Get tested, boys. She might leave a lasting impression on you. Eventually, the police were called, and Dave was dragged out. Later, we all had a meeting with our managers, who made us sign new forms forbidding us from entering office areas without an office manager present. They warned us that any further feuds between warehouse and office staff would result in disciplinary action. Dave was a legend. Story 9. This happened at a previous job many years ago. I worked in a hybrid call center, desk-side support role. As usual, our calls were recorded for training purposes. We supported internal employees for a company with many offices worldwide. We all worked in the HQ building and supported everyone, from the janitor to the CEO. There were roughly 10,000 employees across the city's various buildings and campuses. We had an informal list of people who, if you were having a bad day and they called, it was probably better to skip that call and let someone else deal with them. Of course, we never officially did this. Our number one avoid at all costs on a bad day person worked in the PR department. She also had a BlackBerry with, and I am not kidding, over 65,000 contacts. BlackBerries were notorious for taking forever to back up and restore, even on a good day. Now imagine dealing with that many contacts, practically the population of Daytona Beach. On the day in question, our number one person got a new BlackBerry. She always had to have the latest and greatest, and somehow always found a way to break them, or complained enough about their performance to get a replacement. All of this was noted in the ticket system. She was told at 8 a.m. by the tech setting up her new phone that, if she wanted to take it on her business trip, she needed to drop off her current phone before 10 a.m. She finally brought it to him at 1 p.m. and asked if it would be ready by 4 p.m. He told her it was highly doubtful and suggested she take her current, working BlackBerry instead. She threw a fit, escalated to the tech manager from a different department, and demanded the new phone. As expected, the backup failed multiple times due to the sheer volume of data, and loading it onto the new device also failed repeatedly. At 4 p.m., she called the tech to ask where her phone was. He explained the situation. The new phone wasn't ready, and her old phone was mid-backup, which would take 3 hours. Stopping it would risk losing all her data. Her response? She was furious, blaming IT because she never backed up her phone herself, saying, "That's not my job. It's IT's job." Now she was on the verge of a meltdown. Emails started flying. She claimed her flight left at 5 p.m. It actually left at 9 p.m., but we'll get to that. She insisted we ruined everything. This is where I come in. I was the only one physically present at that time, though my lead was technically working from home. At 5 p.m., the tech handed me the ticket number and explained the situation. He told me to deliver her phone, backup completed or not, if she was still in the building. The backup finished at 5:30, and I started calling her. She didn't answer, so I left a voicemail. I called again at 6 and 6:30, leaving more messages. By 7, I decided I wasn't sticking around for her wrath and went home. At 6:45, she finally called me back, furious. She yelled about the tech leaving late, about only her old phone being ready, and claimed she had left the building. Caller ID proved she hadn't. She also said her flight had already left, leaving her stranded at the airport, another lie. She ranted that IT had failed her and demanded someone drive to the airport with her phone. Minutes later, she called again, saying she was back in the building and would come to get her phone. 10 minutes after that, she called from her desk phone, unable to access our floor due to locked doors, which existed specifically because of people like her. I offered to meet her in the lobby. We met. She snatched the phone from my hand and stormed off to her office. As I returned to my desk to leave, she called yet again. It was past 7 p.m., but I answered. She spent 10 minutes berating me, blaming me for her flight, which she didn't miss, and for locking her out of her phone, claiming it wiped itself after too many incorrect password attempts. When asked what password she wanted, she'd written up 1234 in an email but meant AB 1234 in her head. Instead of asking me to reset it via the server, she wiped it entirely. At 7:30, I called my lead, explained everything, and went home. He told me to log an hour of overtime and come in late the next day. He also promised to have all the phone call recordings pulled for review. Fast forward a week. She called me again. I loudly lamented, "Pure lady is calling me again." My director, whose office was next to my cubicle, overheard and came out. After I hung up, he asked about her attitude. I told him she was surprisingly pleasant. He smiled and said, "If she's ever rude to anyone again, let me know." Later, my lead told me there had been a come-to-Jesus meeting that morning. Present were my lead, my director, PR lady, her manager, and her director. She admitted she hadn't missed her flight and acknowledged wiping her phone was her fault. They didn't even need to play the call recordings. She received a final warning and was written up. From that day until her transfer to another state, she was the nicest person in the company. Story 10. Back in the 1980s, I worked for a company that sold computers specifically designed for car parts businesses. The owner, founder, and much of the upper management were very religious. I think they were Mormon, but many of the technical people who worked there seemed to be heavily into drugs. I heard all sorts of rumors about those people, but I worked way in the back of the building with about 8 other people, and we were pretty isolated from the rest of the 200 or so employees. The only time I interacted with them was during lunch in the cafeteria, and even then, it was just a small number of them. I remember there was an engineer who used to sleep in a van in the parking lot. Sometimes, when I got to work early, thinking I was the only one in the building, I would go to the cafeteria to use the vending machine and catch him, looking high as a kite, throwing up in the big metal sink. There were rumors that upper management suspected rampant drug use, even though alcohol wasn't allowed at any company events, including Christmas parties and picnics. From what I understood, the people using drugs were confident that management had no proof of who was involved, and some of the users were too important to fire, so no one ever faced consequences. One day, a new employee started working there, and she looked like she could have been a highly paid model. An older woman, who had been with the company for a while and seemed to know everyone, was apparently tasked with introducing the new employee to everyone in the building. I only saw the new employee about once a week, but after about a month, rumors started spreading that she was into drugs and had slept with half the men in the building. At one point, she approached me and asked if I wanted to go to a bar with her. I was intimidated. At the time, I was about 22, and she was in her late 20s. She seemed like the most sexually experienced person I had ever met. So I lied and said I had a girlfriend. She approached me a few more times, and once, she mentioned she had weed in her car and asked if I wanted to smoke a joint with her after work. I declined and told her that using weed, even at home, could get her in serious trouble at this company. After that, she left me alone. About 3 months later, I had to walk across the building to the other side for reasons I no longer recall. When I got there, I noticed a lot of security personnel standing around. I started hearing yelling and the sound of things being kicked in different directions. Confused, I hurried to drop off whatever I needed and started back. On my way, I saw a guy I only knew by sight in handcuffs, yelling at security. Other people were crying and shouting, and one guy refused to come out of his cubicle despite security threatening to drag him out. It was absolute chaos, job meltdowns happening all around me. I rushed back to my area and asked my boss what was going on. He simply said, "Nothing good, but it doesn't affect you or the others here, so don't worry about it." I later found out that the new employee had been hired through a private detective agency to go undercover and identify employees who were using drugs. She wrote a report naming names, and based on her word alone, a bunch of people were fired that day. I heard that lawsuits were filed against the company, but I never found out how they turned out. I was just relieved that I hadn't let her tempt me into her car to smoke weed. I still had my job. However, about 6 months later, the company laid off 20% of its workforce, and I was included in that number. After that, I never learned what happened with the lawsuits or the fallout from that chaotic day. Story 11. This might qualify. The person who had the meltdown was me, but I felt it was pretty fucking justified. Also, I can't think of any coworkers who had a bigger meltdown than me. So, here goes. I used to work at a Starbucks in the city. It was busy as hell, and I very quickly learned to read people who were up to no good. By read, I mean I could interpret their body language, not their clothing or apparent social status. One day, this guy comes in, and he's acting shifty. I'm alone at the register, and my barista is busy. He doesn't order a drink but keeps asking for things that would require me to turn around, all while glancing at my barista. So I'm thinking, yeah, buddy, I'm onto you. He starts asking for pastries that aren't in the pastry case, clearly trying to get me to turn around and grab something from the cabinet. Eventually, I have no choice but to turn around to get him a fucking chocolate chip cookie. Even though I turned around, I kept him in my peripheral vision. Sure enough, I see one of his hands make a quick motion. I turn back around with his cookie and place it on the counter in front of him. That'll be $1.72. Oh, and do you mind putting the tip jar back? It was gone. Of course it was gone. This guy was easier to read than Where's Waldo. He gives me a terrible impression of someone who's confused, so I continue. You know, the tip jar that you just took. The one you're hiding under your jacket? Do you mind putting it back? The guy keeps failing miserably at pretending he doesn't know what I'm talking about. At this point, I'm done with this shit. I lean in really close, as if I'm about to whisper a secret. The guy, surprisingly, does the same and leans in close. I guess it was some kind of instinctual reaction, but I don't whisper a secret. Do you think I'm a fucking idiot? Put the fucking tip jar back, or you'll be in jail so fast your head will spin. The dude almost shits his pants. The store goes utterly silent, and every single person is looking at me. Then they look at him. Now everyone in here has seen your face. Put the fucking tip jar back. Now, hey barista's name. Here's the phone, I say, handing my barista the phone while staring directly into the guy's eyes. Call the police. At this point, the guy is completely stunned. Everyone in the store is just staring. Finally, something clicks in his head, and in one motion, he slams the tip jar back on the counter and runs like hell. As he runs off, I notice a woman behind him who looks scared out of her mind. She looks at the guy as he bolts, like she's unsure whether she should follow him. I realize she's probably his accomplice, maybe there to distract the barista? Not sure. Anyway, I'm full of adrenaline and pissed as hell, so I just give her a withering glare. Her eyes go wide, and she runs away too. My manager came out and told me to go take a break. And that was that. I didn't get written up or fired. Company policy was, and probably still is, that you're not allowed to touch someone who steals your tips. They never said anything about yelling. Hooray for loopholes. Also funny, I'm only 5 feet 8 inches and was maybe 135 pounds back then. Just a scrawny, early 20s gamer geek. Not even remotely scary. But apparently, I get that look in my eye when I'm pissed. Seem to work on those too. Story 12. So, I work for a fire department and I'm in charge of a single shift at my station. As most firemen can attest, not all shifts get along with each other. That was the case between my shift and the shift we relieved. Anyway, one of the guys on second shift, I was on third shift, was going through some, admittedly, pretty serious personal problems that I wouldn't wish on anyone. In this field, whether you like somebody or not, if they're dealing with these kinds of problems, we band together to help them out. Just say the word, and we'll be there. This is where it got tricky. This guy didn't say anything, so we didn't know. One of our daily jobs is to mow the grass on Wednesdays. One Thursday morning, we came in and saw that second shift hadn't mowed the grass. They said, "Sorry, we'll get it next shift." Okay, no problem. Sometimes things get busy. But the next time we came in, they still hadn't done it. The guy on second shift, let's call him Mitch, said, "Sorry guys, we dropped the ball. We'll do it next shift." Their next shift would have been the day before our shift yard day. Well, we came in that day, and lo and behold, the grass still hadn't been mowed, and now the weeds were knee-high. The lieutenant on second shift had been off for a few shifts, so that was probably why the yard never got done. You know, the whole when the boss is away, the children play kind of thing. When we asked Mitch about it, he just said, "Yeah, I didn't fucking feel like it," and left. My guys were pretty upset. One of them, the most senior firefighter in the department, let's call him Bill, was livid. Before we even had breakfast, he jumped on the mower and started cutting the grass. By this point, the grass was so tall that it took twice the effort it normally would have. After finishing the yard and blowing everything off, Bill went to check the truck for me. That's when he found the gas can for the chainsaw and generator completely empty. Already pissed off, he had a meltdown and left the gas can on the bay floor. The next morning, he told first shift, don't touch that fucking gas can. I'm sick of doing second shift's job for them. So, first shift left it there. On our next shift, Mitch came to me and told me that in the future, if second shift missed something, we should just cover for them, take care of it, and let them know so they could try to do better next time. Now, this is the same guy who had flat out said he didn't feel like doing his job and told us to handle it. I explained to him why Bill was upset, and that was that. The following shift, second shift's lieutenant was back. He came to me to address the gas can issue again. At this point, I was thinking, holy fuck. Here we are 2 weeks later, still talking about a goddamn gas can. The lieutenant told me the same thing Mitch had. If they missed something, we should take care of it and let them know, and they try to do better next time. By now, I was pretty annoyed. So I said, is that what we're supposed to do with the yard too? Mow it for you, and then tell you didn't mow it? That was like a spark in a powder keg. Mitch jumped up and screamed, "This is bullshit." The second shift lieutenant yelled at him to shut up and said he'd handle it. Mitch kept yelling that it was bullshit. Then the two of them got into a full-blown screaming match. I was almost laughing at this point because the only thing I'd said all morning was the remark about the grass, and now this was happening. Even funnier was that Bill, the guy who had left the gas can on the floor, was off that day. The end result? We all sat around the table and hashed it out. Mitch said he was dealing with personal issues and didn't feel the need to share them with everyone. He had been expecting us to have his back. I told him we absolutely would help each other out, but he hadn't even said he needed help. Instead, he basically told us to fuck off and do the yard for him. I explained, "You're going to catch more flies with honey than vinegar, so to speak." I've never seen a room go from dead quiet to exploding so quickly because of one comment. It's still a somewhat fond memory. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share a similar story or anything you'd like to say in the comments. See you next time.